Hey guys, tonight we slip back to a world where the day begins, not with an alarm, but with a rooster's scream and a rush of cold air through a thatched roof. You stir beneath a rough wool blanket, a farmhand in the 13th century. The stars are still bright, the mist clings low to the furrows, and you can already smell the wet straw and smoke from last night's fire. Outside, the fields breathe quietly, waiting for you to notice them. You're about to discover that farming in the Middle Ages wasn't just muscle, it was mind. Hidden inside every gesture, from how you tie your tunic to how you glance at the sky, is a science few could name but everyone depended on. And you, my friend, are about to live it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into dawn. The air is cool enough to sting your lungs and your boots sink into the dark soil. Every villager is awake. There is no such thing as sleeping in when daylight dictates survival. The bell in the distance hasn't rung yet, but you can hear geese squabbling and a cart creaking somewhere beyond the hedgerow. You glance at the sky, streaked in violet and gold, and you know just by that color that the morning will stay dry. You learned it from your father, who learned it from his father. Red sky at morning, shepherd's warning. That bit of weather wisdom, by the way, isn't just folklore, it's physics. Moisture in the air scatters light differently depending on the pressure system. Medieval farmers couldn't explain wavelengths, but they could read the heavens with uncanny accuracy. You shoulder your wooden rake, your breath visible in the chill, and join the others near the boundary ditch. Everyone checks the horizon first, because the sky was the first medieval clock, barometer, and calendar rolled into one. There's no app for that, only experience. You look east for the pale line of the coming sun, then west to judge if clouds are moving too fast. Wind direction meant everything. A stiff breeze from the west hinted of Atlantic moisture and impending rain. A dry, still dawn meant hard earth, but a safe day for planting. You scratch your chin, pretending to know it all, but the truth is, half the time you guess and hope. Historians still argue whether peasants truly understood meteorology or simply repeated patterns, but whatever it was, it worked often enough to keep you alive. You wander past the open barn door. Inside, your neighbor's son is sharpening the iron edge of a plowshare. Sparks flicker like tiny stars against the gloom. The smell of singed metal fills the air, oddly comforting, like proof that human hands can shape even the hardest elements. "Weather's turning," he mutters. You nod, pretending you'd already noticed. That's the thing about medieval life. Reputation counts. People trust those who can predict storms or droughts. You don't need a title to be respected. You just need to be right about the rain. A crow lands nearby, tilts its head, and watches you with the smug confidence of something that's never paid taxes. Birds were part of the science, too. A sudden silence among them meant a predator, a change in air pressure. Farmers learned to read the animal kingdom the way you read phone notifications. There's a rhythm to it all, and you're learning to listen. By mid-morning, the mist begins to lift. You can finally see the full patchwork of the fields. Strips of green, brown, and gold fanning out from the village center. This is the open field system, the heartbeat of medieval agriculture. Each villager holds scattered strips rather than a single fenced plot designed to share the good and bad soil equally. It's a clever communal calculus, centuries before collective farming was a term. The hidden science here lies in balance. Every decision where to sow, when to graze, depends on constant negotiation between people, plants, and weather. You notice the reeve sword of the village manager stomping through the furrows, muttering about water drainage. He pokes a stick into a puddle and frowns. The ditch isn't flowing properly. You sigh, because you know what that means: shovel duty. You and two others grab spades and start clearing the mud. The rhythm of the work is hypnotic: scoop, lift, toss, breathe. Mud splashes your legs and worms writhe in the sunlight. You're not just moving dirt, though. You're sculpting hydrology. Medieval farmers built ditches with exact angles so rainwater could escape without eroding topsoil. They didn't have formulas, but they had intuition honed by generations of observation. One of the older women joins you, leaning on her stick. When the frogs sing, "Rain's on the way," she says. You nod politely, though part of you wonders if she's guessing. Later, centuries later, scientists will confirm that amphibians do respond to humidity changes, but right now, she's just the local weather oracle. You almost laugh when she adds, "If they sing too loud, the miller's wife's expecting twins." Medieval science often came with a side of gossip. You break for bread and ale by noon. Your hands smell like iron and damp clay. You chew slowly, watching sunlight ripple across the grain heads that sway in the distance. You realize that even the act of eating ties you to the cycle of prediction. You taste what last year's weather allowed. The thinness of the loaf tells you it was a rough harvest, but the ale, that's good. Barley thrived. A farmer reads his meal like a meteorologist reads instruments. Around you, life hums. The blacksmith's hammer echoes. A child chases a chicken through the churchyard. A nun passes carrying herbs for the infirmary, whispering a prayer to Saint Isidore, patron saint of farmers. Faith, you notice, fills every gap where knowledge thins out. When you can't explain why frost struck only one side of the valley, you thank your cursed divine whim. The human brain hates empty space. Belief fills it beautifully. Later, you follow the reeve to the village boundary. There's a stone marker half buried in moss. He kneels and scrapes it clean, tracing the carved symbol of a plow. It's not just decoration, it's a measurement. These stones mark divisions between strips, calculated roughly by how many oxen teams could plow them in a day. A medieval acre wasn't a fixed size, it was effort-based, not geometry-based. That's the quiet genius of it. A system measured by human and animal capacity rather than abstract distance. A boy runs up, shouting about St. Swithin's day rain. You groan inwardly. Here we go again. According to legend, if it rains on that saint's feast, it'll keep raining for 40 days. Historians still argue whether that belief had any predictive merit or was just communal superstition turned tradition. But you admit, surprisingly accurate some years. Maybe there's hidden meteorological pattern, or maybe everyone just remembers the hits and forgets the misses. Confirmation bias existed long before social media. As evening slides down, you head home through golden light. You pass the communal oven, the hum of gossip, thick as the smell of baking rye. Someone claims their cousin's husband can smell snow coming. Someone else swears that hanging dead eels on your fence keeps storms away. You almost choke laughing, but you stop when you realize that behind every absurd tale lies an observation, distorted by centuries of trial and error. This is medieval empiricism in its rawest form: pattern, memory, myth. By twilight, you're exhausted. You sit outside your hut, feet in the dust, and watch the sky fade to bruised blue. Bats flit above. The wind cools, sliding across your skin like silk. You think about tomorrow, the sun's position, the dew's thickness, the way the clouds looked at dawn. You're already building the next prediction in your mind, part instinct, part inherited lore. You might not call it science. You might never write it down. But you live at every step, every sniff of the air, every glance at a crow's wing. And centuries later, scientists will give names to the things you simply knew. You stretch, yawn, and glance once more at the sky. A faint red glow lingers at the horizon, reflected off high clouds. You grin and whisper to yourself, "Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Tomorrow will be fair." You'll get to plant without rain hammering the seeds into mud. Somewhere in that simple rhyme lies all the data analysis anyone in your world will ever need. And for a moment, as the first stars return, You feel something, rare, quiet pride. You may not understand molecules or air pressure, but you read the living earth better than most modern meteorologists could without their screens. The night hums around you, full of unseen logic, and you close your eyes. Knowing the world has always spoken a language that only patient hearts could hear. You wake before the rooster this time, half dreaming, half listening to the sigh of wind moving through thatch. It's darker than before one of those mornings when the sky feels thick, almost sticky. You pull on your rough wool tunic and step into the gray. The air smells of rain and composting straw. Today isn't about watching the heavens. It's about reading the ground beneath your feet, the soil's secret language. You trudge across the yard, boots squelching. The earth feels different every day, and medieval farmers learn to read it like a doctor feels a pulse. You crouch, scoop a handful, and rub it between your fingers. It's loamy, crumbly alive. That texture tells you everything, whether the field is hungry for manure, thirsty for rain, or too sour from last year's barley. There's no pH strip here, just intuition. If it sticks to your palm like dough, it's too wet. If it falls apart like sand, you'll lose seed to the wind. Every decision when to till, when to sow depends on that simple test. You pinch the dirt to your nose. It smells faintly sweet, a sign of life, not rot. And yes, you really do this. The medieval farmer's olfactory test could detect nitrogen-rich soil before the concept of nitrogen existed. Funny how progress sometimes just gives names to things peasants already understood. Nearby, a woman named Alice squats beside you, her headscarf damp with dew. "Smells healthy," she says, nodding toward your handful of soil. "Worms like it." She grins, showing a missing tooth. You laugh softly, because in a way, she's quoting the medieval equivalent of a laboratory report. Earthworms, those little pink engineers, are the secret workforce of the village. Their burrows aerate the ground, their waste enriches it. No one writes them down in tax records, but without them, half the crops would die. A rooster screams from the byre, like a herald announcing your next experiment. You move toward the fallow strip where last year's stubble still pokes through. The reeve says it'll rest another season, but you can't resist checking. You kneel and lift a clump. The roots are breaking down nicely. That's the unspoken science of rotation every few years. You let land sleep to recover nutrients. Not that anyone here would say nutrients. They'd say the earth's strength. It's the same thing, just with more poetry. You remember last year's rye, field overworked, yellow, lifeless? This season, the fallow will heal it. Medieval crop rotation, especially the three-field system, wasn't random. One plot held winter grain, one spring crops, and one lay fallow. The cycle meant less yield per year, but better survival overall. Hidden mathematics again. Sacrifice now to gain later. Even without chemistry, they'd crack sustainability centuries before the term existed. Someone calls from across the ridge, a boy, waving a clump of pale clay. "Bad patch," he yells. You jog over. The clay is heavy and slick, stubborn stuff that swallows plow blades whole. You press it between your fingers, then fling it down with a curse. You'll have to mix it with sand or compost to break it. The irony, that's early soil engineering. Every peasant is a part-time geologist, blending textures to coax life from the ground. By mid-morning, your back aches. You straighten, wiping sweat from your brow, and glance at the horizon. A thin silver haze wavers, their heat rising off damp furrows. You think of how the soil's color tells time. Dark soil means moisture. Pale soil means drought. When you walk the fields in summer, your feet read the seasons before your eyes do. You pass a patch of strange green growth clover and vetch planted deliberately. It's not for food, it's medicine for the land. Those plants fix nitrogen, though no one here knows the chemistry. They just know next year's wheat will grow taller. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood why legumes improved yield or if they just noticed the pattern. Either way, they practice something startlingly close to ecological science. You crouch again, tracing wormholes with your fingertip. A beetle scurries out, dragging a crumb of straw bigger than itself. Everything beneath you is alive. Unseen laborers turning decay into bread. Compost piles steam near the barns, fed by manure, weeds, and last year's straw. The scent is sharp, earthy like coffee for the soil. You grin to yourself. Who knew decomposition could smell so hopeful? A monk approaches from the Abbey Road, robes lifted to avoid the muck. He carries a leather-bound notebook unusual in these parts. "Brother Matthew," you greet him, surprised. The monks are your local scientists, though they wouldn't call themselves that. They experiment with plants, record rainfall, and observe lunar cycles. He kneels beside you, peers at your soil sample, and murmurs, "Rich in humus." You raise a brow. "Whose humus?" you ask. He chuckles softly, shaking his tonsured head. He explains half in Latin, half in patient gestures that good soil contains the essence of life, built from rot and rebirth. You don't fully grasp his words, but you like how they sound. Before he leaves, he offers a scrap of advice. Add ashes from your hearth. Wood remembers the forest, it will feed the grain. You nod. Charcoal and ash, it turns out, add potassium and carbon. Medieval biochar, long before sustainable farming became a buzzword. You carry that idea back to the cottage and scatter ashes over the vegetable patch. The smoke-gray dust drifts into the breeze like ghost snow. Your wife laughs at the sight. "Trying to grow bread or ghosts?" she teases. "Both," you reply. And honestly, you're not entirely joking. Every medieval farmer half believes the earth has a spirit, a temper that must be appeased. Before plowing, you might toss a pinch of grain as an offering, half habit, half hedge against disaster. By noon, clouds begin to form fat, slow shapes with bruised undersides. You wipe your hands and sniff the air. Ozone, faint but clear. Rain's coming. You warn the others to bring in tools. Someone grumbles that you have a witch's nose. You smirk. Maybe you do. Medieval farmers straddled that line between superstition and observation, and sometimes both were true. The old widow down the lane swears she can hear the soil change before rain like a dull hum under her feet. You tried once, ear pressed to the ground, but all you heard was your stomach growling. The first drops fall while you're checking the boundary ditch again. The surface trembles, then darkens, as if the field is waking from a dream. You smell the sharp, mineral scent of petrichor, yes. Even then, people noticed it. Rain was more than weather. It was blessing, risk, and drama all at once. The villagers cross themselves automatically. One mutters a prayer, another complains about the mud. You just stand there, watching droplets form tiny craters in the soil. The earth drinks like something thirsty beyond reason. When the rain eases, you kneel again. The surface glistens. You scoop a handful and squeeze. It clumps perfectly moist, but not dripping. Ideal planting texture. You can almost hear the land sigh. That's when it hits you. Everything you know, every decision, comes from observation repeated thousands of times. Medieval science wasn't theory, it was muscle memory. Evening settles early, clouds swallowing the sun. You and a few others haul compost into heaps beside the barn. It steams in the chill air, breathing like a living creature. A dog prowls nearby, fascinated by the smell. You smile, every sense in your body attuned to decay and renewal. It's strange how beauty hides in rot, but you see it everywhere. In the dark sheen of wet soil, in the delicate mold on straw, in the worms twisting through life's leftovers. Over dinner bread, beans, a sliver of salted pork you discuss the day's findings. The reeve praises your judgment. The soil near the oak grove will host barley next spring. He taps his mug thoughtfully. The land speaks, he says. If you listen proper, everyone nods. The phrase sticks in your mind like a mantra. Maybe that's the real science, listening, not measuring. Later, as darkness folds over the village, you walk outside again. The rain has stopped. The moon pushes through the thinning clouds, silver light turning the fields into a sheet of glass. You kneel one last time, pressing your palm flat to the earth. It's warm beneath the surface, as if something ancient and patient moves down there, waiting. You whisper a quiet thanks half prayer, half habitant stand. Behind you, a barn owl screeches. The sound makes your skin prickle, but you grin anyway. The owl's call, villagers say, means fertility, though sometimes death. Historians still argue whether those associations came from observation or fear. You don't care either way. You just know it feels right to hear the owl tonight when the soil smells alive and the air hums softly like a heartbeat under the stars. You head back inside, leaving muddy footprints on the threshold. Tomorrow, you'll test again, sniff again, listen again. The same small rituals, the same invisible experiments carried out in thousands of villages for centuries. All that unrecorded wisdom, every handful of earth, every whispered guess built the foundation of modern agriculture. You settle by the hearth, watching sparks drift upward like tiny seeds. The fire pops, the smell of wet boots fills the room, and you smile drowsily. The world outside is silent, except for the faint drip of water from the eaves. Somewhere out there, the soil is cooling, dreaming, preparing for another donant you. Its most curious student are part of that dream now. You wake to a quiet, so thick it feels edible. No wind, no clatter of tools, no geese screaming their morning gossip, just the slow rhythm of your own breath. It's planting time, the moment the year's hope gets buried in dirt. You pull your rough cloak tight, step into the pale light, and feel the promise of the season under your boots. Today, you'll handle seeds, the tiny, sacred beginnings that decide whether a village eats or starves. You start by walking to the granary, a timber structure perched on stilts to keep out rats and damp. The air inside is warm and dusty, smelling faintly of straw and yeast. Burlap sacks line the walls, each tied and sealed with wax. The reeve waits by the door, holding a ledger thicker than your arm. Careful, he warns. That's next winter's life you're touching. You grin. He says it every year, but there's truth in it. These grains aren't just food, they're data. Centuries of experimentation stored in husks the size of fingernails. You dip your hand into the first sack. Barley, smooth, light, pale gold. You bring a handful to your ear and listen as it runs through your fingers, sound like rain on thatch. You crush one between your teeth, testing for hardness. Too soft, and it's been damp too long. Too hard, and it'll take forever to sprout. Medieval farmers judged seeds the way sommeliers judge wine, by smell, texture, and a little intuition dressed as arrogance. Your neighbor, a wiry man named Odo, joins you. He carries a small pouch from his belt. New seed, he whispers, showing off a few darker kernels. Bought from a trader out of Flanders. You raise a brow. Imported seed is risky. New strains could mean better yield or complete disaster. You remember the tale of the village that planted foreign rye and ended up with nothing but mold. Still, curiosity burns in you. You take one grain, sniff it, roll it between your fingers. There is a faint sweetness to it, almost floral. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll doom you all. Science always starts as a gamble. Outside, the fields are a patchwork of brown furrows waiting for life. You and a dozen others line up along the ridge, baskets in hand. No fancy drills or machines, just rhythm. You dip your hand, scatter, step, scatter again. It's a dance older than kingdoms. The trick is spacing. Too close and the plants choke each other. Too far and weeds win. You've learned by watching birds how sparrows peck evenly across a field, never wasting movement. You mimic them unconsciously, one step at a time, as seeds arc through the air like a soft golden rain. A child runs ahead, tossing a handful of grain just for fun. The reeve yells, but you laugh. Let him, you say. Maybe luck likes crooked lines. Truth is, some randomness helps. It spreads the crop against disease, drought, or the whims of God. Today's chaos, centuries later, will become statistical probability. But right now, it's just a peasant's hunch. The sun climbs, and your back starts to ache. You straighten, hands on hips, and scan the field. Behind you, a woman chants under her breath, soft, sing-song prayer to the Virgin. She drops a few kernels at the crossroads for good luck. Everyone pretends not to see, but you all feel better for it. In the Middle Ages, science and superstition don't argue. They hold hands. If a charm brings courage, it's useful. If a saint's name steadies your aim, all the better. You pause for water and shade under a cart. A stranger approaches the traveling friar who collects alms and gossip in equal measure. He kneels beside you, draws a small wooden cross in the dirt, and says, "Every grain buried is faith in disguise." You smile politely, but think, no, brother, it's pattern recognition. You've noticed that barley sown after a frost germinates poorly, while wheat prefers the slightly warmed soil of St. George's Week. You've noticed that rain 3 days after planting ruins sprouts unless followed by sun. It's not divine's data. But you keep that thought to yourself. Nobody likes a philosopher with muddy boots. When the work breaks for noon, the village gathers near the edge of the field. Bread, cheese, onion, and laughter, simple fuel for complicated labor. Someone starts a story about the seed witch, a woman said to whisper to grains in the moonlight to make them grow faster. You grin, nearly choking on your ale. So that's why my wheat's lazy, you joke. Didn't hire the witch this year. Everyone laughs, though one man crosses himself just in case. Humor keeps fear at bay, especially when famine lurks just one bad season away. By afternoon, the rhythm returns. Scatter, step, scatter. You watch how the wind moves the chaff, gauging its strength. Too strong, and you angle your throw lower. Every gust is a reminder that nature doesn't take orders, it negotiates. The fine dust rises around you, sticking to sweat, coating your skin with the scent of grain. You think about how each kernel carries memory mutations, cross-pollinations, tiny genetic miracles. You don't know the word genetics, but you know inheritance. You've seen how a stronger crop breeds stronger seed, and how saving the best makes the next year easier. Selective breeding, practiced by instinct, not by microscope. A shout breaks your thoughts. A farmer down the line has found a sprouted seed among the store's disaster if it spreads mold. You all gather around as the reeve inspects the rest. Only a handful show the white thread of premature growth. He orders them tossed into the ditch. You sigh with relief. Mold is the unseen enemy here. Ergot, the black fungus that poisons rye, lurks in damp granaries. You remember the year of the dancing sickness, when villagers miles away convulsed and hallucinated for days after eating infected bread. Nobody understood it then, but centuries later, it'll be called ergotism, basically accidental LSD poisoning from bad grain. Medieval science may not explain it, but it remembers the warning. You've learned dry grain is safe grain. Evening falls slow and golden. The final basket's empty, the last handfuls scatter, and the field looks almost peaceful against lines of faith drawn into earth. You stand there, chest heaving, and realize you've done something monumental. You've taken chaos weather, time, hunger, and turned it into probability. A month from now, green shoots will cover this plain. A season later, the whole village will depend on how evenly your hands move today. As you walk home, you pass the seed barn again. The friar sits outside, muttering over his rosary, counting prayers the way you counted kernels. You wonder if he feels the same pressure, the need to believe that repetition creates order. Behind him, the horizon glows red. You recall yesterday's rhyme. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. Tomorrow will be fair. Maybe the saints approved of your planting. Maybe just the atmosphere did. Either way, you'll take the win. Back in your cottage, you shake the dust from your hair and stretch by the hearth. Your wife hums softly while mending a tunic. She looks up. "How's the soil?" she asks. "Tired," you answer, "but willing." You both smile. The phrase has become a kind of joke in the house and old farmer's flirtation. Half science, half poetry. After supper, you sit outside with a wooden cup of ale. The moon hangs low, pale and sharp. You can almost feel the seeds below, sleeping in the dark, dreaming of sunlight. You remember a monk once said, "Each seed holds a tiny soul, buried and reborn with every season." You're not sure about souls, but you like the image. You whisper a little encouragement toward the field anyway. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants saw planting as an act of faith or pragmatism. You figure it's both. You've seen the same hands cross themselves before throwing grain, then test soil moisture with scientific precision. Faith and science aren't enemies here, they're different dialects of the same conversation with nature. A cool breeze drifts through the night. You rub your palms together, still gritty from work, and smile. It's strange how something so small, so weightless, holds the future. But that's the secret of medieval farming. Knowledge isn't stored in books, it's stored in gestures. How you scatter, how you listen, how you trust the dirt to remember. You glance once more toward the dark field and imagine the seeds beginning to swell, tiny sparks of life pushing against their shells. Somewhere down there, in the silent chemistry of earth and water, the next harvest has already started writing itself. Tomorrow, you'll move to the next field. Maybe test Odo's fancy Flanders barley. Or maybe you'll stick to the old strain that never lets you down. Either way, the science continues hidden under layers of mud, tradition, and quiet genius. You yawn, stretch, and head for bed. The night smells of damp hay and wood smoke. As your eyes close, you picture the seeds again, millions of tiny hearts beating just beneath the surface. You can almost hear them if you listen hard enough. The sound isn't loud, but it's steady. Like rain, like breath, like survival. Morning arrives with a thin mist clinging to the meadows like a sheet of silk. You can hear the oxen long before you see them, the soft grunt, the heavy shuffle of hooves, the creak of wooden yokes. Today isn't about seeds or soil. It's about muscle and motion, the rhythm of beasts and plows, where medieval brains met medieval brawn to tame the land itself. You stretch your back, already aching in sympathy for what's ahead. The field glistens, a pale brown ocean of damp clods waiting to be turned. Two oxen stand tethered by the hedge, their breath puffing clouds into the cold air. Their massive gray hides streaked with mud, eyes calm and ancient. You pat one on the flank, feeling the warmth through your palm. These aren't just animals. They're your partners, your engines, your daily miracle. The reeve approaches, holding the village's pride. A heavy plow, the karuka, with its iron coulter and wooden frame polished by years of use. You run your fingers along the beam, tracing the marks where generations of hands have held it. You can almost feel the ghost of every farmer who pushed this beast through clay before you. The blade's sharp, the reeve mutters. Treat it kindly, and it'll cut clean. You nod solemnly. A dull plow is worse than bad luck. It wastes strength and time, both rarer than gold. You hook the oxen to the yoke, the wooden collar fitting snugly across their shoulders. The sound of the iron chains jingles faintly. The animals snort and stamp, impatient. You whisper their names. Rufus and Belland stroke their necks. Farmers swear that oxen respond to calm voices, and you've seen it's true. You pull gently on the reins, and the beasts lower their heads, muscles rippling like water under skin. The first cut of the plow into the soil is pure satisfaction. The iron slices deep, curling the earth over itself in perfect dark ribbons. The scent hits you instantly, raw, wet, ancient. You inhale deeply, like someone smelling fresh bread. Each furrow is a signature, proof that you've brought order to chaos. The work settles into rhythm. Step, pull, guide, turn. The plow creaks, the oxen grunt, and the ground slowly folds open, neat as pages in a book. It's exhausting, but hypnotic. The sun climbs higher, cutting through mist. Your shoulders burn, your palms blister, but you can't stop. The land must breathe before the next rain. Careful of the corner. Someone shouts from across the field. You pull the reins, adjusting the blade's angle. Medieval plowing is geometry by instinct, curves and straight lines invisible to anyone who's never held the handle. The heavy plow changed everything, especially here in Northern Europe, where thick clay once mocked farmers with its stubbornness. Before its invention, shallow scratch plows barely grazed the topsoil. With this monster, you dig deep, reaching nutrients buried for centuries. That single innovation doubled crop yield and reshaped Europe's population map. You don't know that? Of course. You just know the harvest got better after the smith added iron to the tip. Belle snorts, shaking her head. You stop, unhook her briefly, and rub her ears. Easy, girl. She leans into your hand, grateful. Oxen, unlike horses, have patience. They won't bolt, but they tire slowly and deeply. You scratch behind her horn. The bond between beast and farmer is a quiet kind of love, built on repetition and trust. You've heard travelers say city folk call oxen dumb brutes. You laugh to yourself. Let them try pulling a plow through frozen clay and see who looks dumb afterward. As the morning wears on, other teams join you. The field fills with motion plows, carving side by side, oxen snorting steam, men shouting encouragement. From above, it would look almost mechanical, a medieval choreography of survival. A boy runs from team to team with a bucket of water for the animals. You take a drink too, the liquid tasting faintly of metal and peat. Nearby, an old man named Hamo still uses an ancient wooden ardalite, one-handled plow from his grandfather's time. You watch as he struggles through the thicker soil, his furrows shallow and crooked. He catches you staring and grins through missing teeth. "This one's got more soul," he says, patting the flimsy frame. You chuckle. Maybe he's right. The new heavy plows brought efficiency, but they also meant cooperation. It takes at least 2 oxen and several people to manage. Farming stopped being solitary. It became social engineering. You wipe sweat from your brow. The reeve calls for a pause. Everyone leans on their handles, panting. A group of women appear with bread and ale, laughter spilling behind them like sunlight. You take a chunk of coarse bread and dip it in cold ale, the bitter temps waking your tongue. "The beasts eat better than we do," one woman jokes, nodding at the oxen chewing hay. You grin. That's because they don't have to pay tithes. The group bursts into laughter, though someone makes a nervous sign of the cross. Joking about taxes always feels a bit like cursing in church. When work resumes, the ground begins to dry. The plow catches on roots and stones. Every jolt rattles your arms to the shoulder. You curse softly and yank the reins, adjusting. Beneath the surface lies a world of hazards: old tree stumps, animal burrows, sometimes even bits of pottery from forgotten generations. Once, a man in the next village found a buried bronze figurine and swore it was a fertility charm. He stuck it on his plow beam, and that year, his wife had twins and his field yielded double. Historians still argue whether that was coincidence or the placebo effect wearing a tunic. By late afternoon, your muscles tremble, but the sight before you makes it worth it. A neat, endless pattern of turned earth, glowing red in the slanting light. It looks like velvet. You run your hand through the furrows, feeling their warmth. This is what mastery feels like: the invisible knowledge passed through calluses instead of parchment. The reeve calls you over. He's inspecting the blade, squinting at the metal. "Iron's thinning," he mutters. "We'll need the smith to reforge it before next week." You nod. You've watched the blacksmith work, the bellows pumping, sparks flying, the rhythmic clang echoing through the valley. It's a kind of alchemy, turning dull rock into life-giving edge. You still remember the day he showed you how to temper iron in water and oil, explaining that the metal remembers its strength. You didn't understand, but you believed him. That's the essence of medieval science. Trust the craftsman, trust the process, even if you can't name the principles. As the sun dips, you unhook the oxen and lead them toward the trough. They drink deeply, snorting and shaking their massive heads. You stroke Belle's muzzle, whispering nonsense, half affection, half gratitude. Without these animals, the soil would stay stubborn and silent. You've heard of horses being used for plowing down south lighter, faster, but needing more care. Here, though, the ox reigns supreme, patient, loyal, steady. You sit on a fence post, legs dangling, watching steam rise from their backs. For a moment, the world feels quiet. Just the click of insects and the creak of cooling wood. You realize that every movement today, the angle of the blade, the pace of the oxen, the timing of rest, was a form of experiment. You didn't write it down, but your body remembers every variable. Each pass through the field refines the equation of survival. Night gathers fast. The last light glows amber on the hills. You follow the others, toward the village, the path soft beneath your feet. Someone hums a low tune, a plowman's song about the turning seasons. It sounds mournful and proud all at once. Back in the yard, you unharness the beasts and lay fresh straw in their stalls. The air smells of sweat and hay and satisfaction. You light a tallow candle, watching the flame flicker against the wooden walls. Your wife appears with a bowl of stew, thick and salty. You eat slowly, every muscle sighing in gratitude. She sits beside you, running her fingers over your raw palms. "You'll wear them to bone before winter," she says softly. You smile. "Maybe the land will remember me then." She shakes her head, amused, and leans on your shoulder. Later, lying on your straw mattress, you stare at the rafters and think about the plow blade cooling in the smithy. Tomorrow, it'll gleam again, ready to carve more truth out of earth. You wonder if future generations will still feel this strange joy of control, the quiet pride in a straight furrow. Maybe one day they'll trade oxen for iron machines and call it progress. Maybe they'll forget the warmth of an animal's breath or the scent of freshly turned clay. But for now, you're content, knowing that somewhere between sweat and soil, you and your beasts have performed a kind of sacred geometry lines, drawn not for beauty, but for life itself. Morning arrives with a thin mist clinging to the meadows like a sheet of silk. You can hear the oxen long before you see them, the soft grunt, the heavy shuffle of hooves, the creak of wooden yokes. Today isn't about seeds or soil. It's about muscle and motion, the rhythm of beasts and plows, where medieval brains met medieval brawn to tame the land itself. You stretch your back, already aching in sympathy for what's ahead. The field glistens, a pale brown ocean of damp clods waiting to be turned. Two oxen stand tethered by the hedge, their breath puffing clouds into the cold air. Their massive gray hides streaked with mud, eyes calm and ancient. You pat one on the flank, feeling the warmth through your palm. These aren't just animals. They're your partners, your engines, your daily miracle. The reeve approaches, holding the village's pride. A heavy plow, the caruca, with its iron coulter and wooden frame, polished by years of use. You run your fingers along the beam, tracing the marks where generations of hands have held it. You can almost feel the ghost of every farmer who pushed this beast through clay before you. The blade's sharp, the reeve mutters. "Treat it kindly, and it'll cut clean." You nod solemnly. A dull plow is worse than bad luck. It wastes strength and time, both rarer than gold. You hook the oxen to the yoke, the wooden collar fitting snugly across their shoulders. The sound of the iron chains jingles faintly. The animals snort and stamp, impatient. You whisper their names. Rufus and Belland stroke their necks. Farmers swear that oxen respond to calm voices, and you've seen it's true. You pull gently on the reins, and the beasts lower their heads, muscles rippling like water under skin. The first cut of the plow into the soil is pure satisfaction. The iron slices deep, curling the earth over itself in perfect dark ribbons. The scent hits you instantly raw, wet, ancient. You inhale deeply, like someone smelling fresh bread. Each furrow is a signature, proof that you've brought order to chaos. The work settles into rhythm: step, pull, guide, turn. The plow creaks, the oxen grunt, and the ground slowly folds open, neat as pages in a book. It's exhausting, but hypnotic. The sun climbs higher, cutting through mist. Your shoulders burn, your palms blister, but you can't stop. The land must breathe before the next rain. Careful of the corner. Someone shouts from across the field. You pull the reins, adjusting the blade's angle. Medieval plowing is geometry by instinct, curves and straight lines invisible to anyone who's never held the handle. The heavy plow changed everything, especially here in Northern Europe, where thick clay once mocked farmers with its stubbornness. Before its invention, shallow scratch plows barely grazed the topsoil. With this monster, you dig deep, reaching nutrients buried for centuries. That single innovation doubled crop yield and reshaped Europe's population map. You don't know that, of course. You just know the harvest got better after the smith added iron to the tip. Belle snorts, shaking her head. You stop, unhook her briefly, and rub her ears. Easy, girl. She leans into your hand, grateful. Oxen, unlike horses, have patience. They won't bolt, but they tire slowly and deeply. You scratch behind her horn. The bond between beast and farmer is a quiet kind of love, built on repetition and trust. You've heard travelers say city folk call oxen dumb brutes. You laugh to yourself. Let them try pulling a plow through frozen clay and see who looks dumb afterward. As the morning wears on, other teams join you. The field fills with motion plows, carving side by side, oxen snorting steam, men shouting encouragement. From above, it would look almost mechanical, a medieval choreography of survival. A boy runs from team to team with a bucket of water for the animals. You take a drink too, the liquid tasting faintly of metal and peat. Nearby, an old man named Hamo still uses an ancient wooden Arda light, one-handled plow from his grandfather's time. You watch as he struggles through the thicker soil, his furrows shallow and crooked. He catches you staring and grins through missing teeth. "This one's got more soul," he says, patting the flimsy frame. You chuckle. Maybe he's right. The new heavy plows brought efficiency, but they also meant cooperation. It takes at least 2 oxen and several people to manage. Farming stopped being solitary. It became social engineering. You wipe sweat from your brow. The reeve calls for a pause. Everyone leans on their handles, panting. A group of women appear with bread and ale, laughter spilling behind them like sunlight. You take a chunk of coarse bread and dip it in cold ale, the bitter temps waking your tongue. "The beasts eat better than we do," one woman jokes, nodding at the oxen chewing hay. You grin. That's because they don't have to pay tithes. The group bursts into laughter, though someone makes a nervous sign of the cross. Joking about taxes always feels a bit like cursing in church. When work resumes, the ground begins to dry. The plow catches on roots and stones. Every jolt rattles your arms to the shoulder. You curse softly and yank the reins, adjusting. Beneath the surface lies a world of hazards: old tree stumps, animal burrows, sometimes even bits of pottery from forgotten generations. Once, a man in the next village found a buried bronze figurine and swore it was a fertility charm. He stuck it on his plow beam, and that year, his wife had twins and his field yielded double. Historians still argue whether that was coincidence or the placebo effect wearing a tunic. By late afternoon, your muscles tremble. But the sight before you makes it worth it. A neat, endless pattern of turned earth, glowing red in the slanting light. It looks like velvet. You run your hand through the furrows, feeling their warmth. This is what mastery feels like: the invisible knowledge passed through calluses instead of parchment. The reeve calls you over. He's inspecting the blade, squinting at the metal. "Iron's thinning," he mutters. "We'll need the smith to reforge it before next week." You nod. You've watched the blacksmith work the bellows, pumping, sparks flying, the rhythmic clang echoing through the valley. It's a kind of alchemy, turning dull rock into life-giving edge. You still remember the day he showed you how to temper iron in oil, explaining that the metal remembers its strength. You didn't understand, but you believed him. That's the essence of medieval science. Trust the craftsman, trust the process, even if you can't name the principles. As the sun dips, you unhook the oxen and lead them toward the trough. They drink deeply, snorting and shaking their massive heads. You stroke Belle's muzzle, whispering nonsense, half affection, half gratitude. Without these animals, the soil would stay stubborn and silent. You've heard of horses being used for plowing down Southlighter, faster, but needing more care. Here, though, the ox reigns supreme, patient, loyal, steady. You sit on a fence post, legs dangling, watching steam rise from their backs. For a moment, the world feels quiet. Just the click of insects and the creak of cooling wood. You realize that every movement today, the angle of the blade, the pace of the oxen, the timing of rest, was a form of experiment. You didn't write it down, but your body remembers every variable. Each pass through the field refines the equation of survival. Night gathers fast. The last light glows amber on the hills. You follow the others toward the village, the path soft beneath your feet. Someone hums a low tune, a plowman's song about the turning seasons. It sounds mournful and proud all at once. Back in the yard, you unharness the beasts and lay fresh straw in their stalls. The air smells of sweat and hay and satisfaction. You light a tallow candle, watching the flame flicker against the wooden walls. Your wife appears with a bowl of stew, thick and salty. You eat slowly, every muscle sighing in gratitude. She sits beside you, running her fingers over your raw palms. "You'll wear them to bone before winter," she says softly. You smile. "Maybe the land will remember me then." She shakes her head, amused, and leans on your shoulder. Later, lying on your straw mattress, you stare at the rafters and think about the plow blade cooling in the smithy. Tomorrow, it'll gleam again, ready to carve more truth out of earth. You wonder if future generations will still feel the strange joy of control, the quiet pride in a straight furrow. Maybe one day they'll trade oxen for iron machines and call it progress. Maybe they'll forget the warmth of an animal's breath or the scent of freshly turned clay. But for now, you're content knowing that somewhere between sweat and soil, you and your beasts have performed a kind of sacred geometry lines, drawn not for beauty, but for life itself. You wake before dawn, nose wrinkling at a smell that's hard to describe, something between rain-soaked straw, sour milk, and, well, death on a polite day. You groan, pull on your tunic, and follow your nose toward the edge of the yard. There, behind the pigsty, lies the most important and most disgusting engine of the medieval world. The compost heap. Today, you'll meet the true alchemists of farming. They don't wear robes or chant spells. They shovel muck, whisper to worms, and turn waste into gold. The air is cool, but the pile steams like a cauldron. You poke it with a stick, and a thin plume of vapor rises. "Still cooking," says old Hilda, the steward's widow, who manages this smelly empire. She's wiry and fearless, her hands stained brown from years of mixing things no one else dares touch. "Keep back till the heat drops," she warns. You'll singe your eyebrows. Oh, laugh, thinking she's joking until you feel the warmth radiating from the heap. It's alive. You crouch beside her as she turns the compost with a pitchfork. The layers tell a story. Kitchen scraps, straw, manure, and something black and crumbly that looks suspiciously like ashes. "Everything goes back," she says, matter-of-factly. "The pigs eat our scraps, we eat the pigs, and their droppings feed the wheat. Circle of grace, my boy. Her logic is flawless, if a bit pungent. The smell intensifies as she digs deeper, but so does the fascination. You can see white threads weaving through the muck fungus. She explains, the quiet workers breaking everything down. You touch a handful and it's surprisingly warm, almost pleasant, like fresh bread dough. Beneath the stench lies sweetness, the scent of transformation. Hilda grins. That's life turning itself inside out. She gestures to a smaller pit nearby, where scraps of bone and fish heads rot in the sun. For the barley, she says, strong bones make strong stalks. You remember hearing that in Church Ashes to Ashes, but here, it's literal. Everything dead feeds something living. Historians still argue whether medieval farmers understood the biology of decay. But one thing's clear. They mastered its rhythm long before anyone owned a microscope. As Hilda works the fork deeper, she hums softly, the tune half lullaby, half spell. You stir sun into shadow, she says, between breaths, and shadow turns to bread. You grin poetic, but accurate. The pile crackles faintly as air slips through the straw. It's chemistry, even if no one calls it that yet. Oxygen feeds the microbes. They heat the pile, speeding the breakdown. You think of monks debating Aristotle, while here, underfoot, the peasants are conducting experiments of their own. You help her haul a fresh load of manure from the cowshed. The wheelbarrow squeaks and tilts dangerously. The smell could knock a saint off his altar. Hilda just chuckles. You'll thank it come harvest, she says. Every spoon of muck's a spoon of bread. You dump the load with a wet slap, and the steam rises again. She sprinkles a thin layer of ash on top wood ash from last night's hearth. Keeps the rot sweet, she explains. Too sour, and the worms flee. You nod like you understand, though the logic feels like wizardry. When she's satisfied, she wedges her fork upright in the heap, like a flag on conquered land. That'll do for now. We'll turn it again on St. Swithin's Day. You ask how she knows when to stir it. By smell, she says. When it stops smelling like death and starts smelling like rain, she's ready. You breathe in again, uncertain whether to gag or admire her nose. Later, you join a few men spreading the finished compost over a field that was fallow last year. The soil looks darker, richer. Each handful is alive with wriggling worms, glossy as ribbons. The men joke about Hilda's witch pile, claiming she hides spells under the straw. One swears she once revived a dying apple tree by burying a dead hen at its roots. You laugh, but Hilda just shrugs when you ask her later. Maybe the hen fed the worms that fed the roots, she says. Maybe the roots liked the prayer I said over it. Who knows which part did the trick? That's the secret. No separation between science and superstition, cause and blessing. Everything's woven together like the fibers in her compost heap. By midday, the sun is high, and you find yourself helping the thatcher's boy collect weeds for green manure. He tosses armfuls of nettles and dock leaves into a cart. They rot fast, he says. Good for the cabbages. You ask if the weeds don't fight the crops. Not when they're dead, he replies cheerfully. You grin. Medieval farming is ruthless but efficient. Down by the pond, a group of monks from the abbey wade knee-deep in water, gathering pond scum with wooden rakes. You wade closer, curious. The eldest monk explains that the green muckwat we'd call algae dried and mixed into the compost heap. Rich in God's salt, he says solemnly. He probably means nitrogen, though he doesn't know the word. His hands are stained green, but his eyes gleam with pride. Creation wastes nothing, he says, not even filth. You help haul the dripping mats of slime onto a cart, the air sharp with its swampy temps. As you work, you remember a story you heard as a child, that certain monks once tried to turn dung into gold. You laugh to yourself, it's not so far from the truth. They just didn't realize their gold was food. The afternoon heat thickens, and the smell of compost clings to your clothes. You pause for a drink near the barn, where the steward's son is tinkering with something unusual. A hollowed log set upright, filled with layers of leaves and manure. "A worm tower," he says proudly. The worms climb and drop their castings at the bottom. Hilda says it keeps them happy. You peer in and see the small creatures writhing, their slow dance of digestion. "You know," he adds, grinning, "I heard in the East they keep worms in pots just for the droppings. They say it makes the earth sing." You smile. Maybe it does. Historians still argue whether vermiculture worm composting was known this early, but you're watching proof it might have been. As evening nears, you follow Hilda again to the pile. She's mixing in crushed oyster shells, a luxury from the nearby coast. "Keeps the soil sweet," she says. "To sour and your beans sulk." You wonder how she learned that. "From my mother and hers before her," she says. "And maybe from God whispering in the roots." You realize she's doing soil chemistry without knowing the term, balancing acidity with calcium carbonate. The heap isn't just muck, it's a formula, an inheritance, an invisible textbook. A sudden rustle draws your attention. A raven hops near the compost edge, pecking at a worm. Hilda shoos it away, but then chuckles. He's welcome. Ravens spread the word, carry seeds in their bellies, and drop them elsewhere. You glance at her sideways. "So, compost with wings?" She smirks. "Exactly." As twilight deepens, you help her pitch the last load. The air has cooled, but the pile still steams faintly, breathing. You sit nearby, the smell now oddly comforting. "You know," you say, "people talk about knights and castles like they're the heart of the world. But this heap's what keeps it alive." Hilda nods slowly, eyes gleaming in the dim light. The plow may turn the earth, but this feeds her." A barn owl hoots in the distance. You watch it swoop low over the fields, silent and perfect. The heap crackles softly as the heat escapes. You think of it as a creature, now slow, steady, endlessly hungry. Feeding it feels like prayer. You stretch, stand, and brush straw from your tunic. The night smells of damp soil and smoke. The stars blink awake above, faint but patient. You walk back toward the cottages, passing the pigsty where a few animals grunt sleepily. You can't help grinning at the thought. Someday, their waste will be part of next year's bread. Life, digestion, and divinity, all wrapped into one long, smelly miracle. Inside your cottage, you peel off your boots, still caked in muck. Your wife wrinkles her nose and waves you toward the door. "You smell like the devil's kitchen," she says. You shrug. "Maybe, but he grows fine wheat." She laughs and sets down a bowl of stew, fragrant with herbs. As you eat, you can taste the earth itself in every bite. Later, as you lie in bed, you think about all the tiny visible workers in that heap: bacteria, worms, beetles turning death into life without rest. You imagine the heat pulsing softly through the night, rising into the mist. Maybe you think the world's truest magic is patience, the slow chemistry of renewal that needs no spell, no scripture, only time. The next morning, the air smells fresher. Dew clings to every blade of grass. You pass the compost pile again on your way to the fields, and a thin curl of steam rises to greet you. It feels like the earth is exhaling, whispering, "Thanks." You smile, pat the wooden fork still jutting from the top, and whisper back, "You're welcome." The next morning, fog hangs over the fields like a thick quilt, muffling sound and softening the colors of the land. You step into the chill, boots sinking into dew-soaked soil. And you know today will be about something quieter, subtler: observation. Not plowing, not sowing, not muck, but the hidden rhythms that tell a farmer when to act, when to wait, and when to pray to a saint, just in case. Today, you are learning the secrets of weather, pest, and season. You start at the edge of the barley field, where a thin mist hovers over young shoots. You kneel, brushing the damp soil with your fingers, feeling tiny vibrations. Ants scurry, earthworms curl and uncurl, and tiny shoots tremble with the morning dew. Farmers of old believed that these micro-movements were signs warnings from nature itself. You watch the ants, noting how they travel in precise lines, ferrying scraps back to their hidden nests. Ants know more than we give them credit for, you murmur. In a way, they are engineers, keeping the soil aerated while secretly practicing tiny acts of agriculture themselves. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, sharp and insistent. You look up at the sky. Pale gray clouds stretch thin, like washed-out cloth. By the feel of the air, the damp smell, and the way the clouds move, you've already sensed what the day might bring. Medieval farmers did not have barometers or Doppler radar. But they were masters of reading signs, the direction of clouds, the feel of the wind on skin, the behavior of birds. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was learned empirically or passed down as superstition, but you know better is both. A blackbird lands on a fence post nearby, preening and eyeing the field. Its feathers glint in the mist. You remember something the reeve once said: "If the blackbirds gather in the lower hedges, rain will come by evening." You squint at the horizon. The clouds are moving eastward, faster than expected. Maybe it's true, maybe it's coincidence. Either way, you write the pattern in your mind. You move toward the orchard, where apple trees bend under the weight of last year's fruit, the ground beneath littered with fallen specimens. You kneel and pick up a decaying apple, feeling its soft skin collapse under your fingers. You inhale the scent of fermentation, sweet, tangy, faintly alcoholic. A lesson in decomposition and in patience. This fruit will feed pigs, worms, and eventually the soil again. One small act of decay ripples forward through the ecosystem. Nearby, a child tosses stones at a scarecrow fashioned from old rags and a crooked stick. It flaps in the wind, casting eerie shadows across the ground. You chuckle, but your eye catches movement in the grass, a small patch of caterpillars feasting on young leaves. Panic would be natural, but you know the tricks. Handpicking, encouraging natural predators like birds or beetles. And timing sowing to avoid peak infestations. These are subtle sciences, the invisible choreography of survival. You note the pest's position and plan to return at midday. Walking along the irrigation ditch, you examine the water again. The flow is steady, but there's a slight green tint at the edges. Algae forming. Yes, but also a sign that nutrient levels are just right. You dip a finger in and swirl it. Cold, clean, nourishing. The ditch itself tells you stories. If the water slows, the field floods. If it speeds, roots may drown. Every day is a negotiation, a conversation with the elements. You glance toward the hilltop windmill. Its sails turn lazily in the morning breeze, creaking softly. You notice the shadows the blades cast across the valley below. They are subtle markers, telling you where the sun is and how it warms different fields. Timing, you realize, is everything. Planting, watering, harvesting, all dictated by light, shadow, moisture, and temperature. You move between microclimates like a natural scientist, noting where frost still lingers and where soil has begun to dry. A crow swoops low, cawing sharply. You watch its flight path. Crows are both harbingers and helpers. Their sudden descent into the field may indicate an insect swarm, a sign to check your crops before damage occurs. You recall the strange folklore. Some say crows steal souls, others say they protect harvests. In reality, they are sentinel species, part of an intricate ecological web that medieval farmers unwittingly managed. By noon, the sun has burned away some of the fog. You return to the orchard to inspect the caterpillars. You gently pluck each one and toss it toward the edge of the forest where birds await. Their tiny green bodies wriggle for a moment, then disappear. You smile at the small triumph. Integrated pest management practiced instinctively centuries before anyone coined the phrase. Nearby, an elderly woman kneels beside her raised herb bed, speaking softly to the plants. You overhear her muttering remedies, a mix of Latin phrases and old village slang. Calendula, sage, chamomile plants that repel pests, enhance soil, and maybe, she believes, whisper back when touched. You kneel beside her, brushing your hand over a row of chamomile. You inhale deeply, feeling a faint calm seep into your chest. Medicine and agriculture entwined in the same labor, the same rhythm. You move through the fields like a detective, noting soil moisture with fingers, scanning leaves for subtle color changes, observing insects and birds. Each observation is recorded in memory, not ink, but the effect is the same. Decisions based on empirical evidence. Water when dry, harvest before rot. Plant after frost. The knowledge passes invisibly through the village, stored in bodies, not books. Historians still argue whether peasants codified these rules or simply followed instinct honed by generations. But you can see the logic in every gesture. By mid-afternoon, a thin rain begins to fall, gentle and steady. The smell of wet soil rises, mixing with the faint aroma of compost and herbs. You pause, lifting your face to the sky, letting droplets tap your skin. This is your laboratory, your observatory, your sanctuary. The plants drink, the soil soaks, and you note the rate of saturation. Too much, and seedlings drown. Too little, and drought threatens. Balance, always balance. A group of men approaches, carrying sacks of lime. They sprinkle it over one field to adjust acidity, their movements precise. You watch the dust rise, sparkling in the light. Adjusting pH centuries before chemistry called it that practical knowledge encoded in hands and eyes. You bend to touch the soil afterward, feeling the subtle shift under your fingers, the reaction invisible but undeniable. As evening nears, you climb the hill for a final look. The valley stretches below, a quilt of crops, irrigation, and carefully tended plots. Birds swoop low, preparing for night. Oxen rest in their stalls, munching hay. The air is rich with the scent of earth, herbs, and distant smoke. You realize you have spent the day reading nature like a book, interpreting, predicting, acting all, without a single formal page. You descend toward the village, following a narrow path lined with nettles and wildflowers. The sun dips low, casting long shadows and painting the fields gold. You pause at a fence post, watching a robin fluff its feathers. Its vigilance reminds you that life here is both delicate and resilient. Every observation, every small intervention ripples through the season, shaping the harvest that will sustain your village. Back in the yard, the children play with a wooden hoop, laughter echoing faintly. You breathe in the evening air, feeling both tired and alive. The knowledge of the day, of insects, birds, water, soil, and sky, settles in your mind like a soft, invisible layer of comfort. Tomorrow, you'll continue to watch, to adjust, to learn. Medieval farming is quiet, patient, and endlessly demanding, but it rewards the observant, the careful, the curious. As you settle into your cottage, the smell of herbs drying over the hearth fills the air. You wash your hands in cold water, still warm from the sun, and sit by the fire. Your wife brings bread and cheese, and you eat slowly, savoring not just the flavor, but the knowledge that every bite has a story from soil to seed, from rain to root. Outside, the fog rolls back in, soft and protective. You close your eyes, listening to the distant hoot of an owl and the faint rustle of leaves. The rhythm of the day settles into your bones. Observation is not passive. It is a form of participation, a gentle dance with the land that will carry you into tomorrow. Tonight, the valley sleeps beneath you, humming with the quiet energy of life managed and understood. You imagine the patterns repeating, the lessons of the day stored invisibly in earth, water, wind, and creature. In the morning, you will rise again, watch again, and the hidden science will continue, alive and patient as ever. Dawn rises slowly, a pale, watery light spilling over the fields. You step outside, shivering slightly, though the air smells sweet with morning dew and tilled soil. Today, your focus is on seeds, the small, often overlooked starting points of all agriculture. They are tiny vessels of possibility, each carrying within it centuries of evolution and careful selection. You kneel by the granary, running your fingers along sacks of wheat, barley, and rye. The texture is fine, dusty, and slightly oily. You inhale, tasting history in each grain. The reeve joins you, carrying a small wooden tray of seeds. He lifts each type in turn, letting you inspect it. "See the difference?" he asks. You nod, noticing the subtle variations: size, color, weight. Each seed has a story. Some were chosen for their drought resistance, others for sweetness or early ripening. The medieval farmer may not have known the science of genetics, but he understood selection and inheritance. He observed outcomes, repeated successes, discarded failures. Historians still argue whether these practices were formalized or purely traditional, but you see the method in every gesture. You trudge to the edge of the field where soil is ready, dark and rich from last season's composting. The ground smells warm and earthy under your fingers. You poke small holes, placing seeds carefully and covering them with the faintest layer of soil. It's repetitive, hypnotic work, and you find yourself slipping into a quiet meditation. Every handful of seed represents a future harvest, a bet against drought, pests, and time itself. Nearby, a boy is scattering clover seeds to enrich the fallow soil. You kneel beside him, helping him understand the spacing. Too close, and the seedlings choke. Too far, and you waste precious resources. It is both art and science, guided by instinct and experience. You recall the old stories about farmers burying a pinch of salt with their seeds or whispering prayers to ensure growth. Quirky, perhaps, but these rituals reinforce care and attention psychology meets agronomy in the same gesture. As the morning progresses, the sun warms your shoulders. You pause to watch birds flit among the newly planted rows. Sparrows, finches, and the occasional hawk patrol the edges. Some will eat seeds, others will control pests. Medieval farmers understood these dynamics intuitively. The placement of hedgerows, ponds, and trees wasn't just aesthetic, it was ecological. You consider how every element of the landscape is intertwined, each decision affecting multiple outcomes. A woman arrives carrying seedlings of cabbage and leeks, small green shoots bundled carefully. She bends gracefully, planting in neat rows between the grains. You watch her fingers work deftly, placing each plant at the proper depth and spacing. You realize this is not just about planting it's about timing. Some crops must follow others, some must be protected from frost, and others rely on companion plants to thrive. The medieval calendar, though simple by today's standards, dictated the rhythm of sowing, transplanting, and harvesting. You see patterns repeating across the field, invisible but palpable. You pause by the edge of the orchard, examining the soil around the young apple saplings. Each tree has been pruned and staked with care. The branches form delicate arcs, and the soil is mounded slightly to protect roots from frost. You note how water flows gently around them, feeding roots without causing puddles. You remember a peculiar story? Some farmers mixed crushed eggshells with the soil, believing it strengthened the trees. Chemically, it adds calcium. Magically, it reassures the planter. Both functions matter. By midday, sweat drips down your back. You pause for a drink, noticing the subtle vibration in the earth's forms and insects burrowing. Roots stretching, soil breathing. Everything is alive, interconnected. You watch a small patch of barley and notice tiny holes in the leaves. Aphids. You pluck a few and drop them into a water-filled trench, observing the ripple of life. These small interventions, repeated daily, shape the harvest and the health of the field. Nearby, Hilda's compost heap steams faintly in the sun. You glance at it and realize that everything you do, the seed planting, the irrigation, the pest management, feeds into the compost cycle. Waste becomes resource, death becomes nourishment, and the invisible chemistry of decay completes the circle. You remember the old monk's words about creation wasting nothing. You can see it now in action. The reeve whistles calling you to inspect a new irrigation channel. You walk over, noticing the subtle gradient that ensures water flows evenly. You adjust a small gate, redirecting the flow to prevent waterlogging. The field drinks eagerly. You reflect on how medieval farmers managed water with such precision without measuring tools or modern calculations. It is observation, intuition, and repeated trial, all encoded into generations of practice. Historians still debate whether these techniques were formally taught or simply absorbed through apprenticeship, but you see their logic in every action. By afternoon, clouds gather, bringing a cooling breeze. You watch as dust lifts from the soil, settling lightly on the young shoots. The wind carries tiny seeds from wild plants, reminding you that nature contributes unpredictably to every field. You pause, inhaling the scent of rain mingling with soil and growing things. Every sense is alert: sound, smell, touch, and sight, all used to read the land. A group of children runs by, laughing, carrying baskets of harvested herbs and flowers. They sprinkle petals and leaves across the furrows, a mix of tradition and superstition meant to protect the crops. You watch, thinking about how small gestures passed down through generations encode a kind of folk science. Sometimes it works because of biology, sometimes because of care and attention. Either way, the effect is real. By evening, the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows across the fields. You walk along the rows, checking each plant, each furrow. Everything is neat, precise, and alive. You pause to appreciate the rhythm of planting, the meditative repetition, the tactile connection to the soil, the anticipation of harvest. This is knowledge carried in the hands, eyes, and memory, transmitted quietly from generation to generation. The light fades, and you head toward the village. The air cools, scented with herbs, damp soil, and smoke from hearths. Oxen rest in their stalls, birds roost in the trees, and the wind hums through the hedgerows. You feel a quiet satisfaction. The seeds you planted today carry potential food, survival, and continuity. Their success is the product of observation, care, timing, and a subtle, hidden understanding of the world. As you settle into your cottage, the smell of bread baking fills the room. You wash your hands, still warm with soil, and eat slowly, savoring both food and accomplishment. Outside, the valley softens in twilight, the fields glimmering faintly with moisture. You realize that the rhythms of planting, observation, and care are the heartbeat of medieval life, invisible yet vital, connecting you to generations past and future. You lie down, listening to the wind in the trees, feeling the earth's pulse beneath your feet. Tomorrow will bring more planting, more watching, more subtle interventions. You close your eyes, aware that the tiniest seeds, nurtured with patience and insight, will carry the world forward. The morning fog is gone now, replaced by a pale, steady light that warms the fields slowly. You step outside, boots crunching on frost-hardened soil, and take a deep breath. Today, your focus shifts from seeds and water to the hidden guardians of the crops, fences, hedgerows, and the small creatures that patrol them. It's easy to underestimate the humble hedge, but in medieval farming, it's as vital as any plow or mill. You follow a narrow track toward the edge of the barley field, where a line of hawthorn and elder has been trained into a thick barrier. You kneel beside it, feeling the rough bark, tracing the tangle of stems and branches. Birds and small mammals dart through the undergrowth. The hedge is alive, both a boundary and a habitat. Sparrows, finches, and owls all depend on it, and so do the crops. You notice tiny burrows at the roots, field mice, voles, and shrews. Some of them eat grain, others devour insects and pests. Medieval farmers didn't have the terminology for integrated pest management, but their placement of hedgerows, fences, and ditches shows an intuitive grasp of ecological balance. Historians still argue whether such planning was conscious or incidental, but the results speak for themselves. A boy runs past, swinging a wooden staff, chasing crows away from the newly sown barley. You pause to watch, noting how the crows are clever, waiting for lapses in attention. The boy hurls his staff and a small rock, and the birds scatter. You chuckle, remembering the tale of a crow that once stole a monk's loaf from the abbey garden. Clever, mischievous, and terrifyingly efficient nature has its own wits. You move along the fence line, noticing gaps and worn areas. A man is mending the fence, weaving new branches into the gaps, tightening the structure. His hands are rough, his fingers split and calloused. Each repair takes skill, an understanding of tension and flexibility, even if it's never written in a book. The hedge must resist both animal and weather, bending without breaking. You help, feeling the wood resist under your fingers, learning its rhythm. Nearby, a small stream curves through the valley. Its banks are reinforced with stones and rushes, a natural but managed barrier. You notice tiny crayfish in the water, their claws clicking as they move. Frogs croak from the shadows. The water serves multiple purposes: irrigation, fishery, and drainage. Medieval farmers understood these overlapping functions, often planting fields around natural resources rather than against them. You wade briefly into the stream, feeling the cold water rush over your ankles, and marvel at how carefully everything is balanced. Further along, you encounter a shepherd tending a flock of sheep, their woolly backs brushing against the early sunlight. The sheep graze the field edges, keeping grass and weeds in check, while their droppings fertilize the soil naturally. You realize that every creature in this landscape has a purpose. The sheep, the birds, the mice, they are all part of a living system that predates formal ecological science by centuries. You watch the shepherd gently guide the flock, his voice soft, commanding, filled with intimate knowledge of each animal's habits. You pause near the orchard, where a pair of cats slink among the trees, eyes glinting in the sunlight. They hunt voles and mice, keeping the fruit trees safe from gnawing pests. You notice the network of tunnels beneath the soil, some made by rodents, others by beneficial insects. Every tunnel, every footprint, every chewed leaf tells a story of the invisible battles that sustain the harvest. You kneel, brushing the soil lightly with your hand, and feel a pulse of life, subtle but insistent. By midday, you reach the edge of a recently harvested field. Stubble crunches underfoot, releasing a faint, earthy aroma. You stop to examine the leftover stalks, noticing the presence of small insects, beetles, weevils, and even tiny spiders. These are not pests, exactly, but part of a food web that helps keep balance. Birds swoop low, catching some of them mid-air. You crouch, observing carefully, and realize that medieval farmers, even without microscopes, understood population control through observation and indirect intervention. They didn't eradicate pests, they managed them. A woman appears, carrying baskets of wildflowers and herbs. She sprinkles petals among the crops, a mix of tradition and superstition intended to ward off certain insects or diseases. You watch, noting the overlap of ritual and practical benefit. Calendula petals, for instance, can repel pests naturally, though the farmer may believe it is the blessing of the saints at work. History often dismisses these gestures as mere superstition, yet you see the blend of folk knowledge and empirical observation in every act. By afternoon, the sun is high and the air warm. You return to a corner of the field where a small pond collects rainwater. Dragonflies skim the surface, and frogs dive in and out of sight. You notice small carp flicking beneath the water, controlling mosquito larvae. A man adjusts a small wooden sluice to maintain the pond's level. The system is delicate too high, and the soil floods; too low, and the pond dries. You recognize this as medieval precision engineering, executed without rulers or math. You continue walking along the boundary hedges, inspecting for gaps and weak points. Each branch you touch, each root you examine, tells you about the health of the field. Birds nesting in the shrubs indicate safety, while chewed leaves point to pests. You move with awareness, understanding that every observation informs the next action: repairing, planting, or adjusting irrigation. The field is a living document, and you are learning to read its subtle signals. By late afternoon, you notice a fox dashing along the hedge line, sleek and silent. Its presence is a reminder of the wild world encroaching on cultivated land. You pause to watch, feeling the thrill of observation. The fox hunts for mice, naturally controlling populations that might otherwise threaten crops. The relationship between predator and prey, wild and cultivated, is intricate. Medieval farmers may have feared the fox's cunning, but they also recognized its usefulness. As evening falls, shadows lengthen and the air cools. You stand atop a small rise, surveying the fields below. Hedge, fence, pond, orchard, and pasture all form a network of protection, management, and balance. You realize that medieval farming was not merely about toil. It was about observation, calculation, and harmony with the unseen forces of nature. Every decision where to plant, where to water, where to fence carries consequences that ripple through the landscape. Returning to the village, you pass children playing along the hedgerows, collecting insects and chasing small animals. Their games mimic the labor of the fields, blending learning with play. You recall tales of apprenticeships, where observation and imitation pass down knowledge from one generation to the next. Every gesture, every small intervention encodes wisdom accumulated over centuries. Back in the cottage, the smell of baked bread and herbs greets you. You wash your hands, still scented with earth, and settle down to rest. The knowledge of the datha hedges, the ponds, the predators, and prey settles in your mind. Tomorrow, you know you will rise again, continuing this quiet, intricate dance of observation and intervention, tending not just to crops, but to the entire web of life that sustains them. You lie back, listening to the distant hoot of an owl and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The rhythm of protection, observation, and subtle management hums quietly in the background of your mind. You close your eyes, letting the patterns of the day fade gently into the night. Aware that the hidden science of medieval farming continues, silent and patient, under the stars. Morning arrives with a silver mist rolling over the fields, softening the edges of furrows, hedgerows, and the distant windmill. You step outside, taking a deep breath of cool air mixed with soil and dew, feeling that quiet thrill that comes with anticipation. Today is about culmination, the harvest. All the planting, watering, pest management, observation, and ingenuity of weeks or months comes together now. You trudge toward the barley fields, boots sinking slightly in damp soil, ready to witness the invisible science manifest in golden waves. The stalks sway gently in the morning breeze, whispering secrets to each other. You can almost hear the hum of life beneath the insects, worms, and microbes that have been quietly working since spring. You kneel to examine a stalk, feeling the grain's weight. This is not mere food. It is history, chemistry, biology, and countless human decisions wrapped in tiny kernels. The smell of dry stalks and warm earth fills your nose. You remember Hilda's compost heap and the careful layering that nurtured this soil. Every crumb of decay, every worm cast, every bit of water and sunlight has contributed to this moment. Farmers have already begun working, sickles flashing in the early light. You join them, learning the rhythm. Bend, slice, let the grain fall, straighten, repeat. It's hypnotic and physical, demanding strength, attention, and care. You notice small quirks. Some hold the stalks in their left hand, others in their right. Some twist before cutting to ensure no grain is lost. Each motion has evolved for efficiency, discovered over generations of trial and error. Historians still argue whether standardized techniques existed or whether each village developed its own rhythm. But you see patterns emerging organically. In a nearby section, the children gather sheaves into small bundles, tying them with strips of straw. You kneel beside them, teaching the knots that keep the bundles from unraveling. They giggle when your fingers fumble, but you grin. There's joy in labor when it is shared, even in tasks that seem repetitive. The air is alive with the scent of earth, sweat, and grain. A crow circles above, eyeing the scattered seeds while a sparrow hops along the furrows. Even the animals have roles, thieves and helpers intertwined with human labor. You glance toward the windmill on the hill, its sails spinning lazily. Soon the grain will be carried there, ground into flour, completing the cycle from seed to sustenance. But before that, the field demands care. You pause to inspect some barley heads, noticing tiny punctures of heads have had their way. You bend down, picking them off carefully and letting the children crush them between fingers. It is tedious work, but necessary. Pests have always been part of the equation, and human intervention balances the system. Nearby, the women are winnowing grain, tossing it into the air to separate chaff from kernels. You kneel beside them, feeling the wind lift the lighter parts while the heavier seeds fall back. It is a delicate science, combining observation, timing, and a touch of intuition. You inhale the sweet scent of clean grain, tasting the faint nuttiness of barley on your tongue. Quirky folk traditions come into play here too, tossing grain east to ensure sun blessing or whispering prayers for protection. The combination of ritual and practicality is seamless, embedded in everyday labor. By midday, the sun warms your shoulders, and the field is a chorus of motion, sickles flashing, hands tying, children running, birds swooping, water gurgling in irrigation ditches. You pause near a ditch, noting the subtle change in water level. A quick adjustment with a small wooden sluice ensures the lower field doesn't flood while keeping moisture for roots. Every intervention is precise, informed by observation and experience. Medieval farmers were engineers, ecologists, and meteorologists, all in one, wielding knowledge that modern textbooks call science, though they never used the word. As the day wears on, you move toward the orchard, where apple trees are heavy with last season's fruit. A few trees still hold hardy green apples, their stems thick and leaves glossy. You and a few others gather the harvest carefully, avoiding bruising while keeping the bounty organized. Fallen fruit is carried to pigs or compost, continuing the invisible cycle of decay and nourishment you've seen all season. A fox darts among the trees, sleek and silent, a reminder that wild and cultivated life coexist in a delicate balance. You notice a monk from the abbey walking slowly along the orchard's edge, parchment in hand. He stops to record observations: which trees bore well, which branches need pruning, which soil seems richer. Even the religious orders were quietly compiling empirical data long before systematic study existed. You recall the story about how certain monks would test soil acidity with vinegar or taste, combining folk wisdom with experimentation. Quirky, maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Historians still argue how systematic these observations were, but you can see the pattern of careful attention. By mid-afternoon, the harvest is nearly complete. Sheaves stand in tidy bundles, barley ready for winnowing, apples stored for winter, and the field itself bears signs of careful stewardship. You walk along a hedgerow, brushing your fingers along thorns and leaves. Birds flit among the branches, frogs splash in the nearby ditch, and the distant mill hums with motion. The field is alive, sustained by an intricate interplay of water, soil, insects, animals, and human care. You realize that medieval farming was less about brute labor than about knowledge, observation, timing, intervention, and harmony with nature's rhythms. As evening approaches, the sun paints the fields gold and amber. You pause atop a small rise, looking down at the valley. The barley waves gently in the breeze, hedgerows cast soft shadows, and the windmill sails move with serene consistency. You breathe deeply, absorbing the scent of the harvest, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Every task, from seed to sickle, has been guided by observation, experimentation, and inherited wisdom. The hidden science of medieval farming is visible now, in motion and in results. The village begins to settle for the night. Children play quietly among the sheaves. Women carry baskets of fruit and herbs toward cottages, and men tend to tools and animals. You follow a path toward the barn, where some of the harvested barley is stored. You examine it, noting the slight imperfections, the occasional pest damage, and the rich aroma of earth and sun. The harvest is not perfect, but it is sustainable, balanced, and resilient. You recall all the lessons of water, compost, seed, observation, and protection, now culminating in this tangible bounty. Finally, you trudge home, boots heavy with soil and sweat. Inside the cottage, the hearth glows warmly. Bread is cooling on a wooden board, its aroma mingling with herbs and smoke. You wash, eat slowly, and reflect on the day. Everything you've witnessed, the turning of wheels, the layering of compost, the careful planting and observation, the hedgerows and pest management, the harvest itself reveals a complex, intelligent system. Medieval farmers worked not just with hands and tools, but with understanding, intuition, and relentless attention to detail. Outside, the valley softens under evening light. You stand at the door, breathing in the cool air, watching the windmill silhouette against a sky streaked with violet and gold. You can hear the faint rush of the stream, the chirping of evening birds, the hum of a world carefully tended. You realize the hidden science isn't hidden at all, it's all around, in the flow of water, the tilt of a leaf, the patterns of wind and soil. You have walked the seasons, observed the cycles, and now you carry this knowledge quietly in your mind. As night falls, you lie in bed, listening to the soft sounds of the village settling. The smell of earth and herbs clings faintly to your skin. You close your eyes, letting the images of fields, mills, compost, seeds, hedges, and harvests fade slowly into calm. The hidden science of medieval farming hums softly beneath the surface of your thoughts, patient and enduring, carrying life forward with every turn of wheel. Every fall of seed, every careful observation made by hands like yours centuries ago.